It was on a sunny Saturday in May when I realized my little private paradise was being invaded. As I was walking along the edge of the lake that my grandpa bought decades ago, I spotted a group of strangers having a picnic. Kids were splashing around in the water, adults were grilling, and someone had even set up a little volleyball net. My 25-acre private lake, the heart of the family property I inherited, was being treated like a public park. Subscribe to the channel and give this a like to access more stories like this. "Excuse me," I said as I approached the group. "This is private property." A woman wearing sunglasses and a straw hat looked at me with disdain. "This lake is part of the Lake Vista Estates amenities. It's in the promotional material." I was shocked. Lake Vista Estates was the new luxury condo built next to my property the previous year. I never authorized the use of my lake, let alone its inclusion in their marketing materials. In the following weeks, the invasions got worse. Whole families would show up with coolers and fishing gear. Teenagers threw nighttime parties, leaving trash everywhere. The private property signs I had put up were systematically torn down or vandalized. I decided to confront the condo management directly. That's when I met Veronica Reynolds, the association president. Tall, elegant, and with a calculated smile, she welcomed me into her office decorated with pictures of the lake, my lake, in promotional displays. "Sir, I understand your concern, but Lake Vista was built with lake access in mind. Our residents paid a premium for that. That doesn't change the fact that the lake is my private property," I shot back. "I have the deed and documents to prove it." She gave a cold smile. "Documents can be interpreted in various ways. Besides, water is a natural resource. Nobody really owns water." I left there, furious and determined to protect what was rightfully mine. Things went too far when, on a Sunday morning, I found a floating structure being installed on the lake. A team hired by the HOA was building a dock with a diving platform. "Do you have permission for this?" I asked the supervisor. "Yes, we do, from the Lake Vista administration. This will be the new aquatic recreation spot for residents." I tried to explain that they needed my authorization, not the HOA's, but I was ignored. I called the police, who showed up but said it was a civil matter that needed to be resolved in court. That week, I received an official letter from the HOA stating that, after extensive legal research, they had determined the lake to be a public natural resource, and that my property only included the land around it. The document was signed by Veronica Reynolds and stamped with the association's official seal. The last straw came when a group of teenagers vandalized my boat and broke windows at the lake house. There were tags on the walls with phrases like "Lake for everyone" and "No fence." I hired Patrick Roberts, a lawyer specializing in real estate law. He examined my documents closely. "Your case is solid," he concluded. "The deed clearly defines the property boundaries, including the whole lake. We're going to file a lawsuit." For 3 months, we worked on gathering evidence. I took photos of every invasion, documented every act of vandalism, and most importantly, compiled all of the promotional materials from Lake Vista Estates that falsely advertised the lake as one of the condo's amenities. The turning point came when a dissatisfied resident from the condo handed us text messages exchanged between board members. In them, Veronica admitted that she knew the lake was private property, but said that, until the courts decide, we can enjoy the resource. In court, Veronica's arrogance turned to desperation when we presented the messages. The judge had no doubts when handing down his decision. This court recognizes the lake as the plaintiff's private property, orders the immediate removal of any unauthorized structures, and awards damages in the amount of $175,000. Using part of the settlement money, I hired a specialized company to install a natural green fence with shrubs and hardy plants that clearly marked the boundaries of my property. The fence was beautiful, eco-friendly, and most importantly, had gates with locks at the access points to the lake. 2 weeks after the installation, I received a visit from Daniel Wilson, the new HOA president. Veronica had resigned amid the scandal. "I came personally to apologize for the previous administration's behavior," he said, visibly embarrassed. "Lake Vista Estates is reviewing all its promotional materials and has issued a notice to all residents about the property boundaries." I thanked him for the visit and explained that I wasn't against the residents individually. I just wanted my rights to be respected. Daniel nodded, understanding my position. The green fence was flourishing, symbolizing not just a physical barrier, but a valuable lesson in respecting other people's property. The courtroom victory brought immediate relief, but the repercussions continued to unfold in the following weeks. As the green fence grew and strengthened, creating a natural and elegant barrier around my lake, I noticed significant changes in the behavior of the Lake Vista Estates residents. Most people now respected my property boundaries, but a few stubborn ones still tried to find loopholes to access the lake. One morning, I caught 3 teenagers trying to cut a small opening through the shrubs. When I approached, they ran off, leaving behind their towels and a small cooler. "Hey, you forgot your stuff," I shouted, but they were already gone. When I gathered the abandoned items, I found a student ID card. The name showed that the young guy was the son of one of the HOA board members who had supported Veronica in her most controversial decisions. I decided not to make a fuss. I just dropped the belongings at the condo's front desk with a polite note asking for them to be returned to their owner. 2 days later, I received an unexpected visit. It was the boy's father, accompanied by his visibly embarrassed son. "We're here to apologize," the man said, extending his hand. "My son and I had a long talk about respecting other people's property." The teenager, with his head down, mumbled an apology. "Look, I'm not holding a grudge. Actually, if you ever want to fish on the lake, just give me a call and we can work something out." The boy's face lit up, and the father looked surprised by my offer. "Really? After everything that happened? I have no problem with people who respect boundaries and ask for permission. What bothered me was the invasion and the assumption of rights over something that wasn't theirs." That little interaction made a big difference. In the following weeks, I received a few polite phone calls from residents asking for permission to fish or swim in specific areas of the lake. I set up designated days and times for authorized visitors, creating a simple but effective system. Those who showed respect were welcome, as long as they followed basic rules for environmental preservation and safety. Meanwhile, Veronica Reynolds' situation was rapidly deteriorating. Through conversations with Daniel, the new HOA president, I learned that she had been the target of an internal investigation that uncovered other administrative irregularities. Apparently, the lake incident wasn't her only questionable behavior. The real estate company responsible for selling properties in Lake Vista Estates started facing contract cancellations and refund requests. Some recent buyers claimed they had been misled about the amenities offered. Home values in the condo dropped temporarily, and I saw moving trucks more often than you would expect for such a new development. One afternoon, while fixing my deck by the water, I saw Veronica walking alone on the opposite shore of the lake in the condo area. Even from a distance, I could tell she was eyeing my property with an unreadable expression. Our eyes met briefly before she turned and disappeared among the elegant houses. Later, Daniel confided in me that Veronica was facing not only social ostracism, but also professional difficulties. Her reputation in the real estate business was seriously damaged, and the law firm where she worked as a legal consultant had ended her contract after the judge questioned her ethical conduct. "The irony," Daniel commented during one of our meetings, "is that she could have negotiated an amicable deal with you from the start. Maybe a limited access right for residents in exchange for financial compensation. But her arrogance didn't even allow for a peaceful solution." I thought about that possibility. If she had approached me with respect from the beginning, I might have considered some kind of agreement. After all, I always appreciated the idea of sharing the lake's natural beauty. I just didn't like the imposition and invasion. 8 months after installing the green fence, the landscape around the lake had completely transformed. The shrubs and vines that formed my natural barrier now blended perfectly into the surroundings, creating an ecosystem where birds and small animals found shelter. The wildflowers I had planted in spots were beginning to bloom, adding pops of color along the perimeter. The water in the lake, once constantly disturbed by unauthorized jet skis and careless swimmers, was regaining its clarity. I noticed the return of some fish species that had disappeared during the chaos. The wildlife seemed thankful for the tranquility being restored. Over at Lake Vista Estates, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Daniel and the new board were working hard to rebuild the condo's reputation. They had hired a landscaping company to develop a recreational area within the collective property boundaries, with pools and leisure spaces that didn't depend on access to my lake. One Saturday morning, I got a visit from a group of residents led by Daniel. They brought a formal and respectful proposal. "We'd like to establish an official good neighbor relationship," Daniel explained as he handed me a folder with documents. "We've drawn up an agreement that clearly defines the boundaries of your property and sets protocols for authorized visits to the lake. We've also included a proposal to contribute financially to the area's environmental preservation." I reviewed the documents closely. The agreement not only recognized my rights as the owner, but also proposed an organized system for some residents to enjoy the lake under controlled conditions. In return, the HOA would contribute to an annual fund for ecological preservation and bank maintenance. We want to turn the conflict from the past into an opportunity for environmental education, continued a lady who introduced herself as the new Community Relations Director. We'd even like to invite you to give some talks about the history and ecology of the lake for our kids. The proposal caught me by surprise, but in a good way. It was exactly the kind of relationship I would have appreciated from the start, based on mutual respect and collaboration. I'll review the details with my lawyer, but it sounds like an excellent idea in principle, I replied. Patrick reviewed the agreement and made a few small changes that were promptly accepted by the HOA. We signed the document in a small ceremony by the lake, symbolizing the beginning of a new chapter. Meanwhile, I learned that a group of residents had filed a class action lawsuit against the real estate developer and Veronica personally, alleging false advertising and devaluation of their properties. The case drew local media attention, with some newspapers using it as an example of the dangers of irresponsible management in closed communities. The last time I saw Veronica was at a hearing related to this new lawsuit. She looked dejected, very different from the confident and intimidating woman I had known. Our eyes met briefly in the courthouse hallway, and she quickly looked away, hurrying to avoid contact. I later heard that she sold her house in Lake Vista Estates at a significant loss and moved to another state. The lesson was harsh but necessary. No position of power, however small, should be used to trample on others' rights. As the seasons passed, my relationship with the Lake Vista Estates community evolved in a surprisingly positive way. The educational program became a hit, with guided lake tours where I shared stories about my grandpa and insights about the local ecosystem. The kids in the condo even developed a school project to monitor water quality, and some teenagers, including those who used to vandalize my property, now took part in a youth environmental guardians program. On a quiet autumn afternoon, sitting on the deck my grandpa built, I watched a group of birds migrating over the lake. The water reflected the orange sky at dusk, creating a breathtaking display of colors that always moved me. On the other side, a few lights started coming on in the houses of Lake Vista Estates. The green fence, now sturdy and flowering, was no longer a hostile barrier, but a reminder of the importance of setting and respecting boundaries. The gates at strategic spots were left unlocked during the agreed visiting hours and locked at other times, a simple system that perfectly symbolized the balance we'd achieved. My grandpa's lake remained my property, my refuge, and my responsibility. But now, it had also become an example of how seemingly irreconcilable conflicts can, with the right approach, turn into opportunities to build more conscious and respectful communities. A year after the conflict was resolved, I received an unexpected notice. The real estate agent who had sold several houses in Lake Vista Estates was being sued by the state's Real Estate Licensing Board for fraudulent practices. My case was cited as key evidence. Patrick called me immediately. "They want you to testify," he explained. "Your experience shows a systematic pattern of misleading advertising that affected dozens of buyers." I hesitated at first. Life had gone back to normal, and reliving those tense moments didn't sound appealing. But I felt a bigger responsibility. If it can help prevent others from going through the same problem, I'll do what I need to, I finally replied. During the hearing, I found out the issue went far beyond my lake. The agent had systematically exaggerated or even invented amenities in several developments. An elderly couple had bought a house after being told they'd have regular medical transport, a service that never materialized. A family with an autistic child purchased a property based on promises of specialized sensory facilities that were never built. My testimony, backed by meticulous documentation and incriminating text messages from Veronica, was crucial. The agent's license was suspended for 2 years, and he received a hefty fine. More importantly, a compensation fund was set up for the affected buyers. After leaving court, I was approached by a middle-aged man who introduced himself as Thomas Gardner, owner of a small lake in a neighboring county. "Your story inspired me to take action," he said, extending his hand. "I'm facing a similar situation with a developer. I thought I was alone in this battle until I heard about your case." We exchanged contact information, and I promised to share my experience with him. That encounter made me realize that my personal fight had broader implications. In rural communities across the country, landowners were facing similar pressures from aggressive real estate developments that saw private natural resources as potential amenities to exploit. In the following weeks, Patrick and I put together a small guide, gathering practical advice and legal resources for landowners dealing with invasions or the misappropriation of their properties. The document, made available online for free, became surprisingly popular, being shared in rural property owner forums and land protection associations. The interest in the subject even led me to participate in a panel on property rights and sustainable development at the local university. During the event, an environmental law professor approached me with an interesting proposal. "Your case set an important precedent for our region," he explained. "I'd like to include it in our curriculum as a case study for law students." The idea that my experience could educate future lawyers about the importance of respecting property boundaries and natural resources made me very happy. I agreed immediately and offered access to all the relevant documentation. In early spring, I organized a small celebration by the lake, inviting Daniel, some friends from Lake Vista Estates, and Thomas Gardner, who had obtained a temporary injunction against the developer threatening his property, inspired by my experience. As we served food and drinks on tables set up on the lawn near the green fence, now lush and blooming, I couldn't help but notice how much the landscape had transformed. The fence, which was once a symbol of division and conflict, now blended harmoniously with the surroundings, creating a natural boundary that everyone respected. "Ironic, isn't it?" Daniel commented as we watched kids playing frisbee in the condo's community area on the other side of the fence. Home values in Lake Vista are finally bouncing back, but not for the reasons Veronica imagined. He explained that the condo was gaining a reputation for transparent governance and environmental commitment. The new administration had turned failure into a learning experience, investing in legitimate amenities within the collective property boundaries. They built a small aquatic club with natural pools and recreation areas, and an ecological trail program was in the works. "Actually," Daniel continued, "some recent buyers specifically mentioned that they appreciated the honesty about the property boundaries and the respect shown for the neighboring natural resources. That transformation made me reflect on how communities can evolve when they choose the path of integrity, even after a rocky start." 18 months after the green fence was installed, I got an unexpected phone call. It was from a producer for a documentary channel interested in featuring my story in a series about environmental and property conflicts in developing rural areas. "Your case perfectly illustrates the balance between preservation and development," the producer explained, "especially since it resulted in a solution that benefited the local ecosystem." I was initially hesitant, but after consulting with Patrick and Daniel, I agreed, considering the opportunity valuable for educating the public on similar issues. The only condition I set was that the filming respect the wildlife and the lake's environment. The film crew spent a week documenting the property, the lake, and the green fence that had become the tangible symbol of the conflict resolution. They also interviewed Daniel and a few Lake Vista Estates residents involved in the environmental education program we developed in partnership. During filming, I discovered aspects of my own property that I had never fully noticed before. The biologists with the crew identified rare species of aquatic plants in the shallow areas of the lake, and documented migratory birds using the spot as a resting stop during their seasonal journeys. "This lake is more ecologically important than you think," he explained, pointing at a group of water birds. "It's one of the few unpolluted bodies of water in this region. If it had been turned into an intensive recreational area like they planned, many of these species would have lost a crucial habitat." That perspective gave a new meaning to my fight. It wasn't just about defending my private property, but also about preserving a valuable ecosystem that, by luck or foresight, my grandpa had protected decades ago. The documentary's broadcast brought national attention to issues of sustainable development and property rights. I received emails from people in different states describing similar situations and asking for advice. I forwarded many of these cases to Patrick, who began specializing in this type of litigation. An unexpected outcome of the exposure was contact from an environmental conservation foundation interested in establishing a partnership to permanently preserve the lake and its banks. "We're not suggesting you give up ownership," the foundation's director clarified during our first meeting. "We're proposing a conservation agreement that would guarantee the ecosystem's perpetual protection, even if the property ever changes hands." The proposal included technical assistance for sustainable management, support for restoring degraded areas, and tax benefits. In exchange, I would formally commit to not commercially developing the lake area. Since I never intended to do that, the deal seemed advantageous for everyone. After consulting with Patrick and reflecting on the legacy my grandpa would have wanted me to preserve, I signed the conservation agreement. A small ceremony was held by the lake with representatives from the foundation, residents of Lake Vista Estates, and local authorities. That afternoon, while everyone was celebrating, I walked over to a secluded spot on the bank where my grandpa used to fish. A small, discreet sign had been installed officially designating the area as a protected aquatic sanctuary. I felt a deep connection with my grandpa at that moment, As if I had completed a mission he started. Daniel came over, respecting my moment of reflection. "You know, when I moved to Lake Vista Estates, the realtor showed me pictures of this lake and said it was practically part of the condo," he commented. I was disappointed after learning the truth, but now I realize the reality is much better than the fantasy they sold us. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They promised us a recreational lake where we could be loud, throw parties, and do water sports without limits. What we have now is a respectful partnership with a natural sanctuary, where our kids learn about ecology and responsibility. It might be less convenient, but it's infinitely more valuable." His words perfectly captured the transformation that had taken place. What began as a conflict over property boundaries had evolved into a deeper reflection on our relationship with nature and what it means to be a good neighbor to both other people and the natural environment. 2 years after the initial conflict, I received news about Veronica. She had settled in another state and, surprisingly, was working for an organization that advocates ethical practices in real estate. Daniel sent me a link to an interview in which she briefly mentioned her past experience as a painful but necessary lesson about the limits of professional ambition. The green fence continued to flourish, its gates now open on a regular schedule for guided educational visits. The lake, cleaner and healthier than ever, hosted an ever-growing diversity of aquatic life. The tensions of the past had transformed into a story of redemption and cooperation that benefited the entire community. Subscribe to the channel and give this a like to access more stories like this. On a quiet afternoon, while fishing from the same deck where my grandpa taught me to cast my first line, I reflected on how the fight to protect something precious often leads us to discover its deeper worth. The lake was never just property to defend. It was a living legacy to be preserved and responsibly shared.